Hey everybody. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to take our transition project that we did earlier in the semester and actually implement it into Wwise so that we can hear it within a structure inside of Wwise. The first thing that I've done is open up the Wwise launcher or the Audio Kinetic launcher. And then I'm going to open the version of Wwise that we're using for this class. It may be different in future semesters. What version of Wwise that we're using, make sure to open up the one that is appropriate for your class. So what I'm going to do is create a brand new project. So I'll select new here, and then I'll select a location. I'm going to use my desktop here, which is already pre-selected. Then I'm going to go to the name and name it Transition Project. As a force of habit, I also like to add the Mac platform under platforms. Generally, game development teams are both cross-platform, so it's good to have both the Mac and the Windows platform here. I'm not going to use any of these factory assets, so I'm going to go ahead and select none here, and then I'm going to create my project. It's going to pull up the license information next, saying that while I'm in free mode or trial mode, I can only have 200 assets, which is fine for this project. I'm going to close that. The next thing that's important to do is to enter the correct layout. So go to the Layouts menu and choose Designer. If your window doesn't look like mine, you can reset the layouts by going to Reset Factory Layouts down here. Then you can select everything, hit Reset Layouts, and then it asks you, are you sure? Say yes. It will reset the factory layouts. So because my screen is kind of small right now, it's 1080, I'm just going to move a few things around so it's easier for me to work. Next thing, again, we're in the designer layout. We want to make sure to go to the audio tab. So we have multiple tabs across here, and I want to make sure I'm in the audio tab. Then I'm going to go collect my assets from my transition project. So I'll go to the Finder. Here are my 4 wave files, so my 2 themes, and then my 2 transitions. They are wave files, and it's important to import wave files into Wwise because Wwise has its own audio compression built in. It can create OGG files and other types of compression. So you want to start out with the highest quality files that you can, which are uncompressed WAV files. I would say 48K 24-bit is your starting sample rate and bit depth. And so I'll import those by dragging those to the default work unit. Then I'll open up the default work unit and I'll see what it's done here. So I'm going to select this theme here. It's put my WAV file onto a track, and it's put that track into a segment. I wish it would label that, but it doesn't. You can tell by the icons here, this is a single WAV file, so that represents a track where multiple WAV files represent a segment. So I'm going to rename some things here. There are different ways to rename. I'm going to go ahead and select the track, and then I can use this little box up here to change it to call this a track. I'm just going to rename all my tracks first. I'm going to try and spell them correctly. Clearly, I'm going to start over here. So if you mess up, you can kind of blank out the box and then start over. So I'm going to try that again, get rid of the extra R, and then rename each one of these tracks. So in here, again, selecting it and then adding track at the end. There's another way to rename it, which is to kind of click on it and then click off, and then you can rename it here. Or the third way is to right click on it and then choose rename or F2. And then add in track at the end. Now those are tracks. Now let's label the segments that's put them in. So waves onto tracks, tracks into segments. We're going to go up to this one, and we're just going to go ahead and add in segment. Same for theme 2. I'll use another method here. I'll rename it by right-clicking. And then here, I'll also just click on it and then type in segment. All right, so we have waves on tracks, tracks in the segments, and you should test these files. I'll go up here and select this one. We have the transport down here. Remember, contents, music segment, we want to be in the music segment section. If you're in contents and you see this, you still will get it to play, but eventually we'll want to look at the tracks that are inside of it. So when I play this, I'm going to just listen and see, and I can pause. I can move the transport bar around. Actually, I have to stop in order to move the transport bar around. That's the yellow. If you have reverb tails, that is the green marker and the red marker. So you can add a red, move your red marker to where your reverb tail begins if you have one. Okay, so segments do not loop on their own. The next part is we have to loop our themes. So let's create a playlist where we can loop these segments. You only can loop things in a playlist. So that's a key difference between a segment and a playlist. There are 2 steps to that. One is to create it, which we're going to right click on our segment, new parent, and we're going to select playlist. So we're encapsulating our segment into a playlist. Now, I know that this theme is an Explore theme, so I'm going to title it that. I'm going to say Explore Theme Playlist. So depending on what your game is, it could be something else. It could be, if you're using locations like Boston and New York, it could be Boston theme playlist, or it could be a character theme like Legolas or Gandalf or something like that. So that's the first step. I have to encapsulate it. I have to create it. Then the second thing I have to do is I have to tell this theme how to play it. So I'm going to select music playlist here and then drag in my segment, because the playlist is more of a encapsulation. It's a folder essentially, but I still have to build the playlist, tell it what to play. And so I'm telling it to play by dragging theme 1 segment in here, that it's going to play this, and it's going to play it infinitely. I'm going to choose the down arrow to infinite. I can have it play twice, then stop. I can have it play infinitely, which is what I want here. So I'm going to do that same thing for the second segment. This is my combat theme. I'm going to right click on my combat theme, new parent again, playlists, and I'm going to call this combat theme playlist. Again, it's a 2-step process. It's empty when I first create it, so I have to make sure to drag in my segment and then go ahead and select infinite. All right, cool. So we have 2 themes that should play infinitely. Next, we have these transitions down here. We don't have to loop those, so we don't need to put them inside a playlist. What we're going to do next is switch between these 2 themes. So in order to do that, we need to give Wwise some information about our game. And we have to do that under the Game Syncs tab here. So we go to the Game Syncs tab. Again, we're still in the designer layout, the Game Syncs tab. And we have various types of Game Syncs. We're just going to use states for this. A state is like a location. I'm either in Boston or I'm in New York. A state also could be menu and gameplay. In my transition project, my themes are combat and explore. So those are gameplay states. So I'll create, states are made up of groups and then states. So I'll create a state group here and call it gameplay state. And then I have, I'm going to call it gameplay state group. So it makes a little bit more sense. This is a group. And see how it has three little icons here? That's because when I add in a new child state and call it combat, that's a special way of spelling combat, maybe. All right, see how it's just one. So gameplay state group, these are multiple states, and I'll create another one by right-clicking new child state, and I'll call this one explore. So I have two different gameplay states. Maybe there is a suspense in there, maybe there's some other things in there. Maybe I have a whole nother state that's called location. So I'll call this location state group. And then I might have two locations with inside of that. The Shire and Lothlorien. Okay. Now I've told my game about essentially different states that I have, and now I'm going to apply them to my transition. So I'm going to go back to the audio tab. Then I'm going to select all my structures here. I'm going to right click and create a new parent switch. Okay, so I'm going to switch between combat and explore. I'm going to name this music switch. And because it's gameplay related, maybe I'll call it gameplay music switch. It could be location music switch, it could be whatever you want. I'm going to call it gameplay because we go between combat and explore, which are two gameplay states that I have. All right, the next part is I have to tell it kind of how to play these combat explore themes. So again, I'll select it here and then go ahead and select the music switch here. In music switch, I'll have a little double arrow here, which allows me to select my new state group that I just set up under game syncs. So in my case, I'm using gameplay state group. Use whatever version that you set up in game syncs. And I have two different states, explore and combat. And now I have to tell Wwise what to play during explore. So I'll drag my explore playlist to explore and my combat playlist to combat. So you can see down here that explore plays my explore theme, combat plays my combat theme, and I can get this to work right now. There is one small hiccup. When I play this, it will play all the way to the end of the queue, and because I want to save some time, I want to adjust the transition length. So because my screen is 1080, so it's easy to kind of see, I have to open up this part here. I have to drag this down, and I'll see a bunch of tabs here, and I'll select transitions. Right now, the default in the transition matrix that I have one transition that's set up for any source, so either combat or explore, to any destination, either combat or explore. It's going to wait until the exit queue. Again, I'm going to just reframe this a little bit more. The exit queue is the end of the current segment that's playing. So I want that to happen immediately. So I'll change this to immediate, and then I'll play it. So when I play this and I play my gameplay state group in the transport, these buttons control what I'm listening to, and we can display the states. This is display switches. This is for RTPCs, and this is for triggers. We'll talk about those other things in a future class. But if we select states, I can play my state group. And there is a third option here, none. So I'm going to start with none, and then go to explore, and then go to combat. And you can hear that it's switching immediately when I go from one to the next. Now, you might want to add a fade out or a transition segment. That's what we're going to kind of set up next, is different types of transitions. So I'm going to go ahead and add a custom transition using this little box here, and then select when I'm going to browse for this, when I'm going from my Explore theme to my Combat theme. So again, right-clicking, browse to Combat. So when I'm going from Explore to Combat, then what do I want to happen? First of all, I want that to happen immediately. I want to use a transition segment, and then I'm going to select my first transition. So I'm going to open up that hierarchy, and that plays the transition segment here. I also want a little bit of a fade out on the Explore theme as I'm going into Combat. So I'll edit that and then choose, let's say, a 2-second fade time. So it's fading out the source, and I want it to overlap with the destination. So I'm also going to put in a offset to offset the source to play while the destination is starting. All right, so that's that. Let's hear that. So I'm in Explore, I start playing Explore, and then I play Combat. It's going to play that transition. Then it's going to go into Combat. So I've set that up correctly. I hear the transition and I make that happen. I'm going to show you some options about how to get this a little cleaner later on. Let's go ahead and add our other transition, which goes the opposite way, which goes from Combat to Explore. So browse for Explore here. Again, I want this to happen immediately. I'm also going to put a fade out on it of 2 seconds, like that, overlapping with an offset. The destination in this case is going to be our transition. So I'm going to select my transition and play transition 2. You can see there's a lot of other options here. How do I want the transition to fade in or fade out? How do I want the destination to react, the Combat music, or in this case, the Explore? When I go back to Explore, where do I want to start? And I'm starting at the start of playlist, but I have other options here. I'm just going to leave it as on the default. Okay, now I should hear, when I go from Combat to Explore, the opposite. So I'll start in Combat, then I'll go to Explore. I hear my transition, then I hear the next piece pick up. So I want to adjust that a little bit more. So I'm going to actually look at so here are some advanced options that you can use. When you go to a segment, remember that we have 2 different markers that represent the pre-entry and post-exit. The post-exit in this case is kind of your reverb tail. It also specifies where you want your next piece of music to come in. So in this case, I'm going back to Explore. So when I'm going back to Explore, I want it to overlap a little bit. I want my Explore to start somewhere in the middle of this. So if you remember, this is the cymbal swell that we just heard. And right there is where I'm going to have it play, or maybe a little bit later. This is where I want the Explore music to pick back up. So I'm going to put it right there. So now it will overlap a little bit. Again, you could also do that with the pre-entry. You could have it overlap on the beginning side of it, which we could do to line it up if we wanted to. When I go back to my gameplay switch here, I could, for instance, instead of it being immediate, set it up to next bar or next beat, and then it would kind of flow over a little bit and then go into the pre-entry of my transition segment. In any case, let's test some of this stuff out. I'm selected on the switch, and I can see that in the hierarchy. And then when I play it, and I go from Combat to Explore, and I may have to adjust some other things. I noticed that the Explorer music popped back on for me, which might be okay for you, but I think it needs a little bit of a fade. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, when I go from Combat to Explorer, it's playing that immediately with a fade out, plays the transition, and I'm going to choose on the destination, which is Explorer. I'm going to go ahead and put a fade in on that. So let's say it's 2 seconds like this. Oops, with no the opposite kind of offset maybe. Let's do it like this. So I'm kind of starting it as the transition is kind of playing and then fading it up. You have different types of curves that you can choose from. I'm just going to leave it on the default right now. Okay, I'm going to save all this and then go from Combat to Explore. Transition, fade in, and now I'm in Explore, and this will loop because we set up the loop in the playlist. Now I'm going to go from Explore to Combat. Explore to Combat uses a different transition here, and we'll hear it because it plays our other transition segment. And I can kind of go back and forth as much as I want. So that explains how to do transitions, do some simple editing, customizing your transition with fade outs if you want, or fade ins. You also can apply some of those options to transition segments themselves, and that's how you get it to work. You can add additional transitions to the matrix if you want. For instance, maybe you want to add another one that specifies when going from nothing into Explore. Maybe you want that to also have a fade in. So I could, in this instance, fade in the destination. There's no fade out of nothing, so there's nothing. So I could essentially do a similar thing where I have 2 seconds. And so now when I play nothing to my Explorer, we'll hear that little fade in. You could do something similar for maybe Combat to none, or maybe you have an additional transition that you want to use. It allows you a bunch of different options for how you want to create these transitions and to customize your piece. Okay, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions.